In the dead hush of 2 a.m. when the world feels too small and too heavy, Carlos finally got his 4-year-old daughter back to sleep. He stood in the doorway of her tiny bedroom, watching the gentle tide of her breathing lift the blanket in soft, even waves. Rachel looked impossibly small, curled beneath the covers, her nightlight painting faint gold across cheeks still damp from earlier tears. The same nightmare had come for her again, monsters under the bed one night, a woman fading into fog the next. Carlos never pressed for details. He simply gathered her trembling body against his chest, hummed the old lullaby his mother used to sing until her small fists unclenched from his shirt and her eyelids fluttered closed. Now, exhaustion clung to him like damp clothes. His back ached from 12 hours of night shift maintenance at the hospital, replacing light fixtures, unclogging drains, keeping the building alive while everyone else slept. Those extra dollars meant this 2-bedroom apartment in a good school district. It meant Rachel had her own room, her own bed, a place that felt safe. He had rebuilt their life brick by careful brick after the wreckage of everything that came before. He switched off the hallway light and moved to the kitchen, poured water into a glass, stared at the refrigerator door covered in Rachel's crayon masterpiece. Bright houses with smoking chimneys, green trees taller than the sky, and always 3 stick figures standing together, even though there had only been 2 of them for 2 long years. Ella's name still arrived in these quiet hours, like an uninvited guest. Ella with her pale blonde hair falling across her face, her nervous laugh that turned into snorts when she really let go, the way she used to tuck her head under his chin during old movies. Ella, who had crashed into his life at 20, spilling coffee across his engineering textbook in the university library and apologizing so earnestly he couldn't help but grin. Ella, who had chosen him when no one else thought she should, then unchose him when the weight of that choice finally crushed her. They met at 22 and 20. He was on scholarship, working 2 jobs to bridge the gap. He was a design major from the suburbs, from a house with columns and a driveway that could fit 3 cars. Her family had never pictured their daughter bringing home a black man at first. Ella didn't care. She loved him with a fire that startled them both. She stood up to her parents with a courage that made him believe forever was possible. When her father refused to meet him, she stopped going home for holidays. When her mother started dropping careful hints about their future children, how hard it would be, how cruel the world could be, Ella hung up the phone and sobbed into his chest. They married in a small park ceremonies as friends and his family. Her parents were absent. She told him she didn't need them. All she needed was him. For a while he believed her. Rachel arrived when Ella was 26. Those early months were a golden blur of sleepless nights and fierce joy. Carlos still remembered the first time he held his daughter, teeny perfect, skin like warm honey, eyes the startling blue of a mother's, on felt the entire universe click into place. But after Rachel, something began to fracture. Patricia, Ella's mother, started calling again. Small check-ins at first, then visits, then the comments soft surgical, sliding beneath his skin. She's so beautiful. She could almost pass. Have you thought about where she'll belong? Children can be vicious. I only want what's best for her. For all of you. Carlos watched Ella slowly disappear inside herself. She stopped sleeping, stopped eating, stopped looking him in the eye when he came home. But postpartum depression struck hard. But it wasn't only that. It was the pull of 2 worlds tearing her apart, and she didn't know how to stand in the middle. He tried to reach her, asked what was wrong, asked what he could fix. But Ella had never learned to fight. She had only learned to vanish. One ordinary morning, 2 years after Rachel's birth, Carlos woke to an empty bed and a note on the kitchen table. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. I'm not strong enough. Please don't hate me. She left full custody uncontested. Papers arrived. He signed them in a daze, unable to comprehend how the woman who once fought so hard for them could walk away without a goodbye. 2 years had passed. He hadn't seen her since. Occasional emails about legal details. Birthday cards for Rachel that arrived without return address. Ella had become an absence, a hole in their lives shaped exactly like a woman who used to fill it. Now, at 2 in the morning, his phone vibrated on the counter. Unknown number. Nothing good ever called at this hour. He almost let it go to voicemail, but some nameless instinct made him answer. A woman's voice, professional but urgent. St. Michael's Hospital. There's been an accident. A car crash on the interstate. The patient is Ella Sullivan. She's in emergency surgery right now. Carlos felt the floor tilt beneath him before she finished. Severe abdominal trauma. Acute kidney failure. She needs a transplant in the next 6 to 8 hours or she won't make it. The nurse kept talking. They'd searched the national registry. No match. But the system flagged something extraordinary. Ella's blood type and tissue markers were exceptionally rare. Finding a donor was almost impossible. Except the database had identified one perfect match. 1 in a million. Karloff heard himself ask the questions. How serious? How much time? What were the risks? Like someone else was speaking through his mouth. The nurse answered patiently, but her voice carried the quiet weight of too many midnight calls like this one. They needed him there now. Every hour counted. He hung up. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. He looked toward Rachel's room, where his daughter slept clutching the stuffed bear Ella had given her before she disappeared. If he did this, if he walked into that hospital and let them cut into him, there were risks, complications, a small chance he wouldn't come out the same, an even smaller chance he wouldn't come out at all. And if something happened to him, Rachel would lose everything. Her mother already dying on an operating table, her father under the knife, were 4 years old and abandoned twice. But if he stayed home, Ella would die. And one day Rachel would be old enough to understand. Old enough to ask why Daddy could have saved Mommy but chose not to. Old enough to wonder if he let her die out of anger, out of spite, out of all the pain he'd never quite let go. Carlos picked up the phone again and called his sister. Denise answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep. He told her everything in a rush. He heard her sit up, heard sheets rustle as reality hit. She didn't question his decision, didn't try to talk him out of it, just said, "I'll be there in 20. While he waited, he slipped back into Rachel's room, knelt beside her bed, brushed a curl from her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake, fingers tightening around the bear. He thought of every night he'd spent in this room reading stories, banishing nightmares, promising he'd always be there. Then he thought of the woman across town on a ventilator, the woman who once made him the same promise and broke it. He had every reason to stay, every reason to let the past stay buried. But he wasn't built to stand by and watch someone die when he could stop it. Not even someone who had shattered him, because if he let her die, he'd become someone he couldn't face in the mirror. Someone his daughter might one day be ashamed to call Dad. Denise arrived at 1:45. She hugged him hard in the doorway, searched his face for hesitation and found none. Carlos went back to Rachel one last time, leaned down, kissed her forehead, breathed in the sweet smell of her shampoo, memorized the soft glow of the nightlight on her face. He whispered so low only he could hear it, "I'll come back, baby. I promise." And then he grabbed his keys and stepped out into the rain. The hospital hallways burned with harsh fluorescent lights that stripped everything to pale sickness. Carlos walked them with rainwater still dripping from his jacket, shoes squeaking on linoleum. It was 3:30 a.m., that strange suspended hour, when time bends and nothing feels real. He reached the 4th floor ICU waiting room and stopped cold. Sitting under the buzzing lights in molded plastic chairs were the last two people he ever wanted to see again. Patricia Sullivan looked older, grayer at the temples, deeper lines carved around her mouth, cashmere cardigan thrown over pajamas, as though she'd dressed in panic. Beside her, Richard sat ramrod straight, silver hair gleaming, posture screaming control. They both looked up when he appeared in the doorway. Patricia's face cycled through shock, confusion, then something close to fear. She turned to the desk nurse, voice tight. "There has to be someone else. Another donor who checked everywhere." The nurse tired Knight explained again what Carlos already knew. The markers were extraordinarily rare. The national database had been exhausted. There was no other match. Richard rose, a few inches shorter than Carlos, but carrying himself like a man who had never heard the word no. He stepped forward, planting himself between Carlos and the hallway leading to Ella's room. "What are you doing here?" His voice wasn't angry, just cold, the tone reserved for intruders. Carlos held his gaze. "The hospital called me. I'm the only match." The words landed like stones in still water. Richard's jaw clenched. For a single heartbeat, something flickered behind his eyes, the brutal realization that his daughter, Issa's life now rested entirely in the hands of the man he'd spent years pretending didn't exist. Patricia stood, trembling. "You would do this after everything?" Carlos looked at the woman who had whispered poison into Ella's ear for years, who made her daughter feel like loving him was treason against her own blood. He remembered the holidays they were never invited to, the baby shower where he wasn't welcome, the way she'd looked at Rachel like a mistake that needed fixing, instead of a grandchild to cherish. He didn't answer her. He turned to the nurse instead. "I'd like to speak to the surgeon." The surgeon was a woman in her 50s with calm, steady hands and no wasted words. In the small consultation room, she laid it out plain. Severe abdominal trauma. Both kidneys failed. Without a transplant in the next few hours, organ systems would shut down completely. Surgery carried risks, bleeding, infection, damage to adjacent structures. For a healthy donor like Carlos, serious complications were statistically rare, but rare wasn't zero. Recovery would take weeks. Chronic pain was possible. His body would never be exactly the same. And then, almost reluctantly, she added the quiet part. There was a very small chance, very small, that something could go catastrophically wrong, that he might not wake up. Carlos thought of Rachel asleep with her arms around the bear Ella left behind. Thought of Denise sitting beside her now, probably watching her breathe the way he did when nightmares kept him awake. I thought of what would happen to his daughter if he never came home. Then he thought of Ella, the woman who left a note on the kitchen table and vanished. The mother Rachel still drew in crayon, still asked about in quiet moments. If Ella died tonight, Rachel would grow up knowing her mother was gone forever, and one day when she understood what really happened, she might learn her father could have saved her but didn't. He asked the doctor what he needed to sign. She slid the consent form across the table. Before the pen touched paper, his phone buzzed. He stepped into the hallway, answered Denise's video call. Rachel's face filled the screen, eyes red, hair wild from sleep. She'd woken up, found him gone, and even Auntie Denise's arms hadn't been enough to stop the tears. "Where are you, Daddy?" He leaned against the wall, held the phone with both hands, forced his voice steady. "I'm at the hospital, sweetheart. I have to help someone who's really sick." Rachel sniffled, lip trembling. "Who? When are you coming home?" Something cracked inside his chest, a fault line running through every wall he'd built. He wanted to promise he'd be there when she opened her eyes again. Everything would be okay. But he'd made too many promises already, and he didn't know if this one would hold. "Soon, baby. I'll be home as soon as I can. Be good for Auntie Denise, okay?" She nodded, face crumpling, pressed her cheek to the screen like she could hug him through the glass. Rachel, more than the whole world. The call ended. Carlos stood in the corridor a long time. Lights hummed overhead. Machines beeped in steady rhythm somewhere down the hall. Could walk out into the rain, drive home, climb into bed beside his daughter. No one would blame him. He'd already given Ella more than she deserved just by showing up. But he knew he couldn't. Not because she deserved saving. Because Rachel deserved a father who did the right thing, even when it tore him open, even when it hurt. He walked back into the room and picked up the pen.